My name is Connor, this game is Spell Valley, and you are here for a Hero Spotlight. Okay, so today we are going to talk about one of my absolute favorite heroes, and that is Fire Giant. This has been one of the heroes that has existed since the very beginning of development, since before Spell Valley was a video game, when it was a board game on index cards with a different name. So this hero goes way, way, way back. And it's one of my favorite heroes because I, like you, am descended from a long lineage of pyromaniac monkeys. And so I really like setting things on fire. And that's what you get to do with Fire Giant, is you get to set everything on fire. Not only does Fire Giant's spell burn everything around him, but it also burns himself. And because Fire Giant is a flamekin, not another kin, a flamekin, fire actually heals him. And so the same fire that deals damage to the heroes around him actually heals Fire Giant himself and makes him harder to kill. So the plan with Fire Giant is you're going to walk him up the board like you do with most giants. And you are going to use his ability Blaze to set fire to your opponents, set fire to Fire Giant himself, and then use that fire to keep healing him through any damage he might take. Now, I'm getting a little ahead of myself because for you to really understand how this works and what's going on, I have to talk about fire and how fire works in Spell Valley. So fire burn is Spell Valley's damage over time effect. This is the status effect that deals damage to your hero every turn at the end of every turn. And it means that we can trade off between heroes that deal smaller amounts of damage up front immediately and heroes that do more damage over time. And so there's a whole set of fire heroes that utilize this burn mechanic to give higher delayed damage. So if we summon our Fire Giant here, and we can throw out a Warrior and a Knight to face off against. Let's say we use Fire Giant's spell, Blaze, to burn the opponent. So Blaze burns Fire Giant himself and all the heroes next to him. So now this Knight has burned 2. And if we use our spell again, it repeats, and now everything has 4 burn. Okay. And like most heroes with spells, Fire Giant can still act, in addition to using his spell, so he can attack the Knight. Okay. And you can see that +4 there shows Fire Giant healing because he had burn. And it didn't increase his health at all because he's already at his max health, but you'll see how this actually will heal him back to his max health over time once he takes damage. So our Knight took 3 damage from the Fire Giant's attack, but otherwise hasn't been damaged by the burn. And if let's say he attacks the Fire Giant, walk up at our Warrior, that ends the Knight's turn. You see he took 4 more damage, happened a little quickly. He took 4 more damage, and the burn amount was decreased by 1. So every turn, at the end of every turn, you take 1 damage for each burn you have, and then the amount of burn goes down by 1. So, naively, if you have 4 burn, then you're going to take 4 damage after the first turn, 3 damage after the second turn, 2 damage after the first turn, and 1 damage the turn after that, for a total of 10 damage in that case, over 4 turns. Now, 10 damage is a lot of damage for only 2 mana from the Fire Giant, so that was pretty good. However, that's damage over time, right? A bunch of that, 6 of that damage you don't get until later turns. And there's one more catch, and that's that when you move a hero, they lose burn. So that's true for the Fire Giant. The Fire Giant can walk back like this. Now his +3 burn went down to +2. So you lose burn at the end of every turn and when you move. And so that means if heroes are moving around a lot, their fire, the amount that they're burning is going to decrease, and they will take less damage. So if I'm the knight on my turn, right, you can see there's the fire giant healing. He gets his 2 health instead of 2 damage because he's a flamekin. He goes up to 10 health. And he has 1 burn left. We got this little plus here to show that he's actually going to be gaining health from the burn. Now let's say this knight doesn't want to take 3 damage, right? Well, they can move once, and that drops the burn to 2 without taking, that you only take damage at the end of the turn. And he can do it again to drop it to 1. And so now he'll only take 1 damage at the end of his turn. And there the knight takes 1 damage. Okay. Now, the nice thing about one of the really important properties of the Fire Giant's Blaze ability is that it can stack. So if I'm just gonna pass the turn here. So you can see here's a case where the Fire Giant has 3 mana. You say, well, wait, Blaze only costs 1 mana. How does he have 3 mana? And that's because Fire Giant has max mana. He actually can hold more mana than he needs to cast his spell. And this lets him cast Blaze multiple times in a turn. So here, if we have 3 mana, we can Blaze 3 times in a row. So now, our Fire Giant is going to gain 6 health at the end of the turn, and he still has 5 burn. And these heroes are going to be, burning this turn as well. Now, I guess I position the Fire Giant in a place where the Knight and the Warrior can take him out in this one turn. And then it doesn't matter how much he's healed, because he's just going to die to their attacks. And this is the key thing to realize with Fire Giant, is the 2 things that scale are the max mana, so the maximum number of times you can burn in one turn, and it's better to burn all at once because it stacks, right? Because 6 burn is you're burning for 6 turns, right? But if you spread that out over many turns, if you Blaze once one turn and once the next turn and once a turn after that, all that burn is being lost over time, and so you're healing less, and the heroes you're burning are taking less damage. And so it's really valuable to store. You want to store up that mana as much as you can, and then use it all at once. Which is why max mana is so valuable, right? All that changes about Fire Giant is he gets 1 more max mana at level 3 and 1 more max mana at level 5, and then he gets more health at levels 2 and 4. Right? So actually, compare this to a giant. A giant gets 1 more attack. I don't have him here, but a giant has 1 more attack and 3 more health every level. So the Fire Giant is actually scaling a lot less. But because an individual point of max mana is so good, and because an individual point of health is so good, because if you don't kill him all in one turn, he might heal back up to full health. This hero is actually getting much more powerful over the 4 levels, even though it doesn't look like it just by seeing how much his stats scale. And this is one of the really fun things, I think, about Fire Giant, is that he kind of flips what it means to be a giant on its head. And, compare to your regular giant, right? Regular giant, he's got a lot of attack and a lot of health. And if he gets on top of you, he's going to do a ton of damage all at once, immediately. And you have to really whittle down his health over time, or else he's going to be hitting you with that much damage, right? He's got a ton of health. You got to hit him consistently as he crosses the board before it's too late. The Fire Giant is the opposite of this. Not only does he do damage over time instead of all at once, he only has 3 attack. It doesn't scale at all, right? A level 5 Fire Giant has, less attack than a level 1 regular giant, right? So his attack is not a big source of damage. All the damage is coming from his Blaze, and that's damage over time. It's not damage all at once. And furthermore, he has this healing over time instead of having more health. And so, unlike a regular giant, which you need to be wearing down consistently over time, you actually don't want to hit the Fire Giant until you have to, and so you can kill him all at once. because otherwise he's just going to be healing and healing and healing and healing. And I think this really like flips what it means to be a giant on its head, even though both heroes are slow and deliberate, even though both want to like gradually work their way up the board, even though their sort of overall goal is similar. The fire giant provides this over time variation of it because he's got damage over time and health over time instead of damage and health up front. And I think it's just a really fun, it's a really fun concept. It's really fun to play. It's really satisfying when your fire giant is on top of your opponent's heroes and they just don't have the damage to take them out and he's setting everything on fire. The other little tips and tricks I want to mention is thinking about, there's two little notes I want to make. One is it says burn all heroes and towers within 1 twice. This doesn't say enemies. It's not burn all enemies. It's burn all heroes and towers. So you got to be careful with the fire giant because you can burn yourself. If you have heroes right next to fire giant or fire giants right next to your towers, you can burn down your own towers. You burn your own heroes, and that could be really bad. And so it's actually especially important to get the fire giant up the board, because if the enemies are on top of you and you have to blaze and you're blazing your own heroes, well, that's no good. And actually, that's an important thing to note, is that fire giant is less effective as a defensive hero than giant, because if the fire giant is pushed back against your towers and against your other heroes because he's defending, he's going to be burning them too, and that's probably bad. And so fire giant is inherently a more aggressive hero than giant is. Okay. And then one more note is that, obviously fire giant heals himself, right? Because instead of dealing damage, burn heals fire giant. But it's not just his burn. There are other sources of burn. So we can take a hero like Fire Mage, right? Fire Mage is like a mage, except she throws fireballs that deal damage over time. So Fire Mage is like a damage over time mage. She also has max mana scaling, which has the similar implications for her that it does for Fire Giant. But this means that these are actually a really fun pair. Is if you have a Fire Mage and a Fire Giant in your deck, you can actually use the Fire Mage's fireball and cast it on the Fire Giant to get him burning. And this means he's just going to have way too much healing, and it's going to be really hard to kill the Fire Giant. Now, the downside of that, of course, is that it means you're using a fireball on your own hero and not one of your opponent's heroes. So you have to make that trade-off of when is it worth pumping up my Fire Giant with a fireball versus, targeting a backline hero, or combining it with Fire Giant's burn to deal a lot of damage. All right, we talked about Fire Giant's strengths. Let's talk about his weaknesses. So the kinds of heroes that threaten Fire Giant are ones that do a lot of damage. So heroes that have high attack are especially strong against Fire Giant because if they can kill him all at once. He actually doesn't have as much health as the other giants do. If you can do 9, 12, or 15 damage to him in one turn and take him out, then he's in trouble. And if you threaten to do that amount of damage, then he can't walk up and he can't burn your heroes, right? So high attack is one solution. Another solution is ice heroes. You got to cool them down. Ice heroes slow down their enemies. And slow means that you can only use one action per turn. So that means that if you're the Fire Giant, you can only use Blaze once. And if you do, you can't move or attack. So every turn you have to choose between move. If you're slowed, you have to choose between moving, attacking, and burning. And you can't burn multiple times and stack it up. So the max mana aspect of the hero becomes useless. So ice heroes in a pinch are a great way to deal with Fire Giant, or anything that will slow him down. And I'll talk more about slow in future videos. The other thing that's really good against Fire Giant, so you have things that prevent him from dealing damage to begin with, or make his damage less effective. Or rather, you have ways to exploit his lower health, and then you have ways to mitigate his damage. So slow would be one way to mitigate his damage. Another way to mitigate his damage is with fast heroes. Burn is best against heroes that don't move very quickly. And that's because every time they move, they lose burn, and that really adds up over time, the total amount of damage that they've lost. So a hero like Knight is going to move faster. He's going to lose more burn every turn before he takes damage. And fast heroes are also good against Fire Giant for a second reason, and that's that they can just kind of ignore him. They can run past the Fire Giant to his towers and kill the towers, and that's a real risk with Fire Giant. Sometimes, especially with the slow heroes, especially with heroes that threaten an area, a smaller area of the board and do so a lot, like Giant or Fire Giant. Sometimes you have to just decide, there's no way I'm killing this thing. I have to go for the towers. And sometimes that can be really effective. You get your Fire Giant all the way across the board, and then your opponent's fast heroes run by him, losing their burn in the process, and go for your towers. And then you're in trouble. To counteract that, the Fire Giant does base race pretty fast, because he can damage multiple towers at a time with Blaze, and Blaze will stack with the existing burn that's on the towers already. When towers take damage, that's via burn as well, and so burn is especially effective against towers, also because the towers can't move to lose the burn. So if you want to deal with a Fire Giant, you want lots of attack, you want to slow, and maybe you just want to ignore him entirely. And so it's on the Fire Giant player to prove that you can't just ignore the Fire Giant. If you have a Fire Giant in your deck, you need to prove to their player this is something you have to deal with, and you should consider heroes that are going to force the player to deal with the Fire Giant instead of just running around and ignoring him. So we already talked about the strengths. Those were some weaknesses, a few ideas of counters and ways you can deal with them. That's all I've got for Fire Giant for the moment. Remember to like, subscribe, download the game, please. Tell your friends about the game and have them download it too. Drop a comment. You can join the Discord and talk to me directly there as well. So I really appreciate your time and attention. Thanks for listening in. Stay tuned for more Spell Valley content. Cheers.